Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Untitled Chapter from the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center. Welcome to today's session, ESSA, Early Warning Systems and Chronic Absenteeism. Please allow me to share some brief details about today's session. Our presenter is Dr. Bob Belfant from the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center. Dr. Belfant is a research professor at the Center for the Social Organization of Schools at Johns Hopkins University School of Education, where he is co-director of the Talent Development Secondary Reform Model and director of the Everyone Graduates Center. He focuses on translating research findings into effective school intervention. In 2013, Dr. Belfant was named a champion for change for African American education by the White House. Today's session will last for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes and is being recorded. We will be placing everyone on mute. Please do not unmute yourself, but instead refer to the chat function on the right side of the screen for any questions or comments. Any unanswered questions will be answered by email within the next couple of weeks. Before I hand over to Dr. Belfant, I wanted to share with you the mission of our National Center. The mission of the Center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Dr. Belfant, I hand it off to you now. Bob, we aren't able to hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. All right. Take two. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. I'm Bob Belfant, and we're here for the session on ESSA, Early Warning Systems, and Chronic Absenteeism. And we're hoping to have a rich discussion today on how those connect to each other, and how they connect to the Every Student Succeeds Act, and how they can be used to help our students succeed and thrive in school. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first talk a little bit about what chronic absenteeism is and why it matters, and then how that might be connected to the Every Student Succeeds Act. Then I'm going to talk about what early warning systems are, what they can play, how they can help students in school succeed, and how that connects to the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then hopefully we'll have a rich dialogue and discussion with each other to help each other think this through, because these are rich and a little complex issues, but ones that potentially have the ability to benefit our students in great ways. And all of this is part of our first national convening for our National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center, and the launch of the Technical Assistance Center that works on those issues through the U.S. Department of Education. So let's begin. What is chronic absenteeism? Why does it matter, and what is its impact on student and school success? Or, for example, big question, why should we care about this? Well, first, we have to level set. What is chronic absenteeism? By chronic absenteeism, we mean we're missing so much school, right, that it interferes with our ability to do well academically. And this is more and more being defined as missing 10% or more of school, which over a 180-day typical school year essentially is close to 4 weeks of school. And we can all understand if you miss 4 weeks of school or even 3 weeks of school or even 10 days of school, that it makes it very much harder to succeed at school. And by chronic absenteeism, we mean missing school for any reason. So it really combines excused absences with unexcused absences with suspensions. You put that all together, that gives you total days of school missed, and that, if it's of a sufficient level, either number or percentage, that becomes chronically absent. The reason this is a concern for us is being in school really matters. It turns out, and this is a good thing, that the evidence is very clear that when kids are in school, they learn, and when they're not in school, they don't learn. And so this is true from pre-K to college. It really matters to have good attendance in pre-K and kindergarten. Often people think like maybe it doesn't matter so much, we're just getting used to school, a day here is okay. But kids that have chronically absent in pre-K and kindergarten struggle to read by 3rd grade, which then makes them struggle throughout school. It's kids in 6th grade that miss a month or more of school are much more likely to ultimately drop out than those that don't. Kids in high school that have good attendance end up doing much better in college than kids that don't. So it has an impact all along our system. And if we wanted to be a diabolical way to prevent kids from succeeding, we would have them randomly miss 10% of the school year. We couldn't get sort of more diabolical if we wanted to find a way to make it hard for them to succeed. So that's why we care about it. And as this slide shows, it's really easy because it sneaks up on us. And that's one of the challenges of chronic absenteeism. It can almost be invisible until it's visible. So this diagram from our friends at Attendance Works just shows us that you miss 2 days in 1 month, 3 days in another month, 1 day in another month. But if you do that every month, you miss 23 days of school, over a month of school, right? We could clearly see if you miss a month of school, you're in trouble. No one would say, like, it's okay to miss a month of school. But people might say a day here, a day there, it's not great, but it's okay, not knowing that those days add up, right? And we also know for some ongoing research that parents underestimate how many days their kids have missed by 50%, right? So it often is invisible until it's visible, and then a lot of the impact and damage has been done. And it was only this summer, for the very first time, that we actually got a national count of how many kids were chronically absent across every school in America. It's part of the U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Survey, which is the first time asked schools to report how many of your kids missed 15 or more days of school for any reason. Prior to that, again, we didn't even have a national picture of how many kids were chronically absent. Another way that it sort of was invisible until it was visible. This made it visible. It told us millions of kids were missing 3 or more weeks of school. It told us that we had variability. Was this from 5%? Some places over 30% of the kids were missing a month or more, 3 or more weeks of school. And this just showed us that it is actually a significant national issue, and we have millions of kids who are not attending school on a regular basis. And what some of the analysis we conducted for this showed is that, in a way, this is both a widespread and a highly concentrated challenge, which is that almost every school will have some kids chronically absent, but it may just be 1 or 2. In other schools, in the most impacted elementary schools, they can reach 15, 20% of kids. The most impacted middle schools, 25, 30% of kids. In the most impacted high schools, it can reach half the kids. Imagine a large high school where half the kids are chronically absent. We're talking 300, 400, 500 kids, really overwhelming the ability of the school to respond. Some analysis we did shows that, again, that every district have some, but that it was highly concentrated actually in just 4% of our districts had half of the chronically absent kids. Some of these were very big districts, so if it was only 10% chronically absent, it was still 14,000 kids. Others were districts where the rate was highly concentrated. A final key thing to remember about chronic absenteeism before we look at its connection to ESSA is that for all its impacts and for all its invisibility until we make it visible, it is actionable. We can do something about it. We can really influence it, right? It's not something that's beyond our control. Once we recognize what it is, we can actually address it. And this is why I often say it's akin to bacteria in hospitals, right? For the longest time, people didn't fully realize it was actually the bacteria that was in the hospital itself that were causing patients to get sick after they got after their main thing they came to the hospital for was cured, they got the bacteria, and that made them worse. Once people understood that, they recognized there's a lot of things they could do to reduce that bacteria and make it a much more healthy experience for patients. Chronic absenteeism is quite similar. Once we recognize it's there, once we make it visible, there's a lot we can do about it, and we can have a lot of impact. So, partly it's addressing the myth that, it's only unexcused absences that matter. Any day of missed school means you're missing school, you're missing learning. That you can miss a day or two here, it doesn't really matter. We've seen that adds up, and only matters for older kids, and we've seen that's not true. We also know that some kids don't make it to school regularly because something is preventing them from getting to school. This might be a health issue, a dental issue, a transportation issue, a safety issue, a homelessness issue. Many of the things that the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, as the Department of Ed, for which this center is a part of, works directly to provide schools resources with and information on how to address those barriers. Some kids don't come because they're avoiding something in school. They're struggling academically or socially. They're being bullied. They have an undiagnosed learning difference or disability and just feel unable to hear what's going on or feel ostracized for it. And then some kids, after a period of time of often struggling with aversions and barriers, become disengaged and feel like no one notices them, no one sees them, no one cares if they're there. They think they can come 4 out of 5 days and do okay. They're not great arbitragers at this age, and they actually get it wrong, and they get in trouble academically, and then it often leads to more disengagement. But the key point is once we make it visible, we can kind of see some fairly straightforward things we can do to make a difference. Which brings us, one more point before we get to ESSA. The final point, and why we have to worry about chronic absenteeism, not just average daily attendance or truancy, because people will say, hey, we've focused on attendance for a long time. We always measure how many kids on average are there. And we've had truancy laws in our district for 100 years to deal with kids that don't come on a regular basis. 2 key points here to really stress the need to be an advocate in your district for why measuring chronic absenteeism matters, and not just average daily attendance or truancy, is that average daily attendance can really mask the extent of chronic absenteeism. It's one of the ways we make it invisible. So you can have average daily attendance in the low 90s, and we're hardwired to believe that something in the 90s is an A, must be pretty good. Let's worry about something that's below the 90s that from our school data to focus on. But you can have average daily attendance in the low 90s and still have a quarter of your kids missing a month or more of school, because it's different kids on different days making up that low 90s%, right? And if you don't recognize that, you might think, hey, our literacy rate's 30%, and we've got to really have some extra interventions there, and then get frustrated when they don't work and say, I don't know, not sure what to do, not recognizing that many of the kids that needed that intervention probably were not attending on a regular enough benefit to benefit from it. So that's a case of how when chronic absenteeism is invisible, it can have a lot of impacts on things, and we're not even aware of it. Truancy is typically defined as missing a certain number of days or a pattern of unexcused absences. 3 unexcused absences in a row, 10 in total, triggers a series of cascading actions of more and more severity. But this misses a lot of absences, right, when they are excused, or most districts don't count a suspension as an unexcused absence. So a lot of missed days of schooling are not counted when we just count truancy. And particularly in the elementary grades, most absences are excused, right? Truancy tends to get higher in the formal definition as kids get older. If we're only looking at truancy, we're almost ignoring all of those early elementary and pre-KK absences that really do add up and are really having major negative impacts. All right, so that's our background. Chronic absenteeism matters. It affects how we learn, how we succeed in school, and schooling success is very sensitive to being there, which in a way is good news. It means the stuff happening in the school is really mattering, but it also tells us our kids have to be there every day. Chronic absenteeism has sort of been an invisible force and presence because we haven't measured it. When we do measure it, we see it's fairly extensive. It's a little bit everywhere, and it's highly impacted in a number of subset of those places. Yet it's something we can do something about. We can actually move against it and change kids and reduce their chronic absenteeism, because the reasons they're not coming are reasons which are addressable within our capacity to address. So that gets us to ESSA. And really there's three ways I'm going to bring up. These are not the only ways that chronic absenteeism and ESSA intersect, but it's the three we're going to sort of focus on today. It's a required reporting element in state report cards. It can be used as what's called the, quote, fifth indicator for state accountability. And Title II funds also can be used to train teachers on how to reduce chronic absenteeism. And that's pretty important because if it's a new skill and a new thing we want people to address, we got to give them some training. And it's nice to know there's a way to access some funding for that training. All right. So what about reporting chronic absenteeism on a state report card? We have some of the specific language from the statute on this slide. And basically what it says, I'll let you read it directly. I won't give it much interpretation. I'll just let you see what it says. But the key thing is it does say that one of the things to be measured, if we see in that second bullet, is chronic absenteeism. And it says explicitly that it includes both excused and unexcused absences. So what this tells us is, which is good news, is through ESSA, we will continue reporting on those state report cards on the level of chronic absenteeism in our schools for those that are in the way that is required by the statutes. So that tells us that we're going to help make it visible. That's a good thing. Another place where chronic absenteeism, and a number of states, at least there's been reports in the press that they're considering this as their fifth indicator, is that as part of ESSA, it says for all public schools in the state, there will be no less than one indicator of school quality or student success that allows for meaningful differentiation in school performance, that is valid, reliable, and comparable and statewide, with the same indicator or indicators used for each grade span, as such term is determined by the state, and that it may include one or more measures of the following, and in that any other indicator the state chooses is where a lot of people are sort of using the idea that chronic absenteeism might work as a good fifth indicator on the state, in the state accountability systems, which is, as ESSA says, you have to have one requirement, one indicator that is a measure of school quality or student success. So for folks that are thinking about it and or actively moving towards using it as their fifth indicator, or if you're on it from a district and you haven't been able to pay that, you know, your state hasn't not yet fully sent out a lot of information about what's there, you may soon see that they've selected perhaps chronic absenteeism as their fifth indicator on their accountability system. So there's going to be some things just to think about, both at the state level and just implications for districts if the state so chooses to use chronic absenteeism as its fifth indicator for that sort of in the ESSA accountability frameworks. So one question that states will have to ask themselves is if we're using chronic absenteeism as the fifth indicator, are we going to need to actually have a common statewide measure of what chronic absenteeism is, right? Because one of the things it says that we have to measure everything the same. We can't have different districts measuring chronic absenteeism in different ways, right? We have to have one way to measure it. So states will have to grapple with that. And some states may well pick a number, a threshold, which is, again, kids are chronically absent if they miss 15 or more days. Some states might go with a specific share of missing school, which is they miss 10% of the school days. There's arguments different ways about different states and districts have different lengths of school years and which one of these is a better way to deal with that. States will work that out, but it probably will be one of these two ways they'll go, which is either have a set level of number of days or a percentage of share of school missed, which will then be the definition of you are chronically absent if you cross these thresholds. They're going to have to ask the question, is there a need to establish that chronic absenteeism is based on a total number of days missed for any reason, excused, unexcused, and out-of-school suspensions? That is how chronic absenteeism has traditionally been defined in the field. States will have to ratify that if they so choose to say what we say chronically absent is based on total days missed for any reason. Another question they'll have to grapple with is there a need for a common statewide definition of day of schooling, right? What is a day? If we say you're chronically absent if you miss 15 days of schooling or 10% of the days of schooling offered, then states may well have to define in a common way what a day of schooling is. Is that if you're there half day, is that a day? If you're there 2/3 of a day, is that a day? That's something states will have to grapple with. Then they'll have to double check, does it allow for a meaningful differentiation in school performance? You could make an argument based on the evidence we've given that that will be demonstrated because we've shown, and if you were were able to attend the chronic absenteeism plenary session after this one, led by Hetty Chang and Attendance Works, you will get ample amounts of evidence beyond what I've shown here today that, in fact, it is a meaningful differentiated school performance, that levels of chronic absenteeism are highly correlated with academic achievement. And actually some work we did in New York City showed that in a very convincing way, if you look at a group of kids that are chronically absent and become no longer chronically absent, you clearly see their achievement going up in that year. And you take another group of kids that were not chronically absent the prior year and become chronically absent, and you see their achievement going down, and you actually see those two lines cross, which is a very sort of rare inside baseball finding for social science to actually see the lines cross like that. But that's very strong evidence that school achievement is very tightly tied to school attendance, and hence would make the argument that it would provide a meaningful differentiation in school performance if you're measuring chronic absenteeism. And then finally, the states will have to ask, is it valid, is it reliable, is it comparable? There's going to be a breakout session tomorrow on this very topic of ESSA and chronic absenteeism. And for those that have interest of going deeper in this, I really suggest you either, if you signed up for that, it'll be a very great session. And if you weren't able to sign up, you can look at the archive copy of it, and that will go into more detail on showing the extent that this is a valid and reliable and comparable indicator, making it qualifying for it as if a state chose to be that fifth indicator. All right, a lot to cover there. Okay, the final thing we mentioned where chronic absenteeism and ESSA intersect, and of that we're highlighting today, there are other ways within ESSA that you can find chronic absenteeism referenced, or you could make a case chronic absenteeism would fulfill ESSA requirements. But the final one we're talking about is the fact that under the Title II section, there is a part of the statutes which says that Title II funds to train teachers can be used to address issues related to school conditions for student learning, such as safety, peer interaction, drug and alcohol abuse, and chronic absenteeism. So specifically mentioning chronic absenteeism is a thing where those Title II funds could be used to train teachers to help them understand how to address it in their school. All right, deep breath. That was chronic absenteeism and chronic absenteeism's connection to ESSA. Now we're going to take a brief pause and then pivot to what are early warning systems and how do they connect to ESSA. All right. So what are early warning systems? You may have heard this phrase, but you may not fully understand what it means or how it goes together. Many of you may be able to attend the first plenary session today. Johan Lillegren and others had a very long and strong session on early warning systems, a lot of rich details. Again, to go deeper, I encourage you to check out that archived version if you weren't able to participate in it directly. So I'm just going to touch on it very lightly here and then make the connections to ESSA. So the core idea of early warning systems are that to graduate high school, college, or career ready, students need to successfully navigate several key transitions and acquire a set of behaviors along the way. Essentially, you need to learn how to be good at school, right? You have to learn how to attend, you got to learn how to get your work in, you got to learn how to meet your teacher's expectations, you got to learn how to get along with your peers, you have to learn how to do what's expected of you to progress in school. Students then signal they are on or off track towards these outcomes through their behaviors. In many cases, they're waving their hands, saying, I need some help. We have to learn how to recognize those signals because it's sometimes a little more subtle than hand waving in order to be able to address them. So by tracking these early warning indicators, it is possible to identify when students are beginning to fall off track and provide time to intervene or change supports and alter their trajectory through high school. The whole idea of early warning indicators is a student is saying, hey, I'm about to go in a bad direction, or I'm starting to struggle, or I've been struggling for a little while, I need some help and support, but if you give it to me, I have plenty of time to sort of change, solve my problems, change the behaviors, have better outcomes, and succeed in school. The whole point is there's still time to do something, right? And the good news is in this work we found is we actually have enough time to see the kids that need some additional help, try something, have it not work, learn from that, try again, try something else, have that work, and put them back on track. So the key idea is if we look for early indicators, we have the time to get the right interventions at the right time to the right kid to make a difference, even if we have to like stumble around a little bit in the beginning to find what the right supports are. And using EWS, schools can capture the data that will drive decisions about how to best apply school-wide preventative, targeted, and intensive interventions. The key idea there is schools have a lot of interventions in their toolbox, but it's really getting what's the best thing to use to which group of kids when is really what early warning systems are trying to help with. So what do we mean by early warning systems? At its simplest level, an early warning system combines indicators, which is sort of the data, the thing that says, this kid is signaling that they need some help. These have got to be reliable and valid, which means that when kids have these indicators and if we don't do anything, bad stuff happens. And it happens reliably in a way that tells us it's important to intervene when we see those signals. Or good stuff happens if they're on-track indicators. Kids that have these indicators almost certainly have ultimately good outcomes. That tells us that it is a reliable outcome and it is valid towards our goal of having kids succeed. Our indicators need to be predictive. They need to tell us that this behavior now predicts even a different outcome, whether it's high school graduation or college readiness or academic achievement. This thing we're taking indicator predicts that other outcome that we value. And we really want each indicator to tell additional information, right? We don't want to have lots of indicators that are telling us the same thing. We want each indicator to add new information, and if we didn't have that indicator, we'd miss some kids that were signaling and needed some help, and we missed them because we didn't have the indicator to pick up the type of help they were signaling for. That's on the indicator side. On the intervention side, we really got to have this idea that we need to have some whole school prevention, reduce the number of kids that are, chronically absent, or reduce the number of kids getting in trouble, reduce the number of kids not getting their work in. We got to have some mid-level small group things for kids that we can handle in groups. And then for the highest need kids, we got to have some case management, small one-on-one or very small group to deal with their customized problems. That, in essence, is the classic tiered intervention model we find in public health. It's in a different variation. It's, response to innovation uses a different process for that. But it's a basic idea of tiered interventions, the whole school, small group, and individual level. We pair that with our indicators. That together we have our early warning system. But for that to work, there's the human element. We need facilitation and teams of adults working on this. Over time, we've developed some pretty good evidence of what we would call sort of these core indicators, core early warning indicators. Ultimately, it's good for systems to run their own data to find their own cut points. But in the meantime, right, we found that kids that are missing 10% or more of school, as we talked in the chronic absenteeism section, right, are not having good outcomes. That's pretty clear. We want to do something when kids are signaling that level of absenteeism. And we know the kids that really thrive are the kids that are missing 5% or less of school. So we really want to push up the number of kids that are missing a week or less of school, essentially, and push down the number of kids that are missing a month or more. We know kids that are getting suspended are often, that often has high impacts on them ultimately succeeding. We often tend to want to believe it's like an adolescent version of timeouts, just a brief pause, everybody catches their breath, comes back the next day, and everything's much better. But for many kids, they actually see it more as shunning, right, which leads to very different responses. We've also learned in our data that kids that even just get mild sustained misbehavior, get sent to the office a lot, are also signaling that they're not connecting to the norms and expectations of the school, and until that's resolved, that's a signal. If that continues, is they have high likelihood of not having good outcomes. The kids that's not up there, I apologize, but the kids that really thrive in behavior are the kids that really are, have a sense of purpose and a sense of hope and a sense of agency, that their efforts can make a difference. They have a path forward. They have supports. They have belief that if they work hard and get some help and have some strong adult support, which they believe they have, they will succeed. Course performance, we know that failing a class, even as early as 6th grade, if you fail math or English, that's pretty hard to do. But if you do it, it's a pretty strong signal that absent interventions, you're going to be in trouble. And then on the flip side, we know the kids that have a B or better average are the kids that own the state university system. You want to see who's going to be in your state university system? Look at your kids in 9th grade that have a B or better average, good attendance, stayed out of trouble, and are on age. So those are strong signals to be on track. by as early as 9th grade, you essentially have got to be good at the fundamentals of school. And the extent that kids are signaling early they're having some trouble with those fundamentals tells us that's our target to get them to by at least the 9th grade, so they have strong grades, they're coming every day, they're not getting in trouble, and they're on track for success. People always say, well, okay, that's great, but what's an evidence-based intervention? Where do we find them? We listed a number of good sources here. There is growing compendiums of these evidence-based interventions that you could use to fill out that pyramid at the whole school targeted and intensive level. I'm not going to go into details today, but just to point out, these links are places where people have spent a lot of time and thought actually developing a compendium in ways that could be understandable and useful to people in schools. These are strategies to address these factors that the kids, these early warning indicators, with strategies that have been shown to work. Want to add one piece of data from our own work, which is we conducted a large multi-year randomized control trial with 60 schools, and actually in those schools specifically implemented early warning systems with teams of teachers sharing common sets of kids coming together once a week to talk about those kids with facilitation, with extra adults who are working as mentors and tutors, all pooling their knowledge, all saying what's going on with this kid who's suddenly not coming to school, who's starting to get in trouble, who's not getting their work in, who has a good relationship with this kid, who can talk to them, understand the root cause, who will champion an intervention, make sure it gets done, and then let's come back and check in a couple of weeks and see if any difference has been made or we have to change our intervention, because Plan A doesn't always work, and it's good to go to Plan B, but you can only go to Plan B if you're monitoring Plan A and know it's not working. We found when you do all that, you can really reduce have a positive and statistically significant effect on reducing the number of kids who end 6th and 9th grade with no early warning indicators. That really is the big driver for school success, is when you end 6th and 9th grade with no early warning indicators. It means you have good attendance, you're not getting in trouble, you're passing your classes. If you do that in the 6th and 9th grade and continue it, you're on a good journey to school success. And which is this data shows in an evidence-based way that when we do this, we can actually bend that river and have a kid who's heading one way and turn their direction in a much more positive way. That just gives us hope that this work, again, like as we saw in chronic absenteeism, can really make a difference for the kids in our schools, in our districts and states, and is really a focused way to deal with that part of the equation of, for the good teaching and learning to work, kids have to be there, they have to be focused, they have to get their work done. And that's really what this final slide shows here, that early warning systems help drive improved attendance, student effort and engagement, leads to course passing, leads to increased promotion, leads to increased high school graduation rates, and ultimately college success. All right, so how does this connect to ESSA? And again, there are multiple ways that one can make a case that ESSA and early warning systems connect to each other. We're not trying to be comprehensive here. We're just trying to point out a few places in the statutes where one can draw that relationship. And one place that we can do that is really in the comprehensive support and improvement section of ESSA, and really where it talks about the idea that for schools needing comprehensive improvement, that part of the expectation is they will use evidence-based interventions. Once they've done their needs assessments to identify their needs, they'll find evidence-based interventions against those needs. And I think that's a clear place where people that are looking for a connection between early warning systems and ESSA can find it. And again, we're sharing what the statutes say, so there's real good clarity to what the connections and what they are, and you can see that on the slide. All right. So again, the suggestions are, the connections are, is that it can be part, you could actually use early warning systems as an evidence-based practice to reduce chronic absenteeism, right? So if a state were to pick chronic absenteeism to be that 5th indicator, and schools were being held accountable for reducing their chronic absenteeism, and we're looking for evidence-based approaches to do it, a case can be made that early warning systems could be an evidence evidence-based way to reduce chronic absenteeism. So that's one connection. Another part is it could be part of the evidence-based reforms in schools undergoing comprehensive improvement, which is schools that are in the bottom 5% of the state accountability system, and high schools with graduation rates below 67%. So early warning systems could be part of the evidence-based packages if the needs assessments identified that one of the things the school needed to do is to help kids come more often. If they had trouble get their work done, then a case could be made that early warning systems could be a good evidence-based strategy as part of that comprehensive improvement. And also the same goes for the schools that need to do targeted supports. These are the schools where there's found to be substantial and continuing gaps of performance between subgroups of students. And again, that could be an appropriate place to make a case to say that early warning systems would be an evidence-based approach to help address those subgroup gaps that were identified. So with that, I'd really like to open it up to have some dialogue with folks on the phone. I'm hoping that some of you have been thinking about this at the state or district level about how to address or use chronic absenteeism to advance ESSA things in the statutes that are part of the requirements of ESSA, and are thinking also about maybe early warning systems as being part of school improvement strategies. And again, I would recommend to you that there was a nice breakout session tomorrow on using early warning systems as part of school improvement strategies if you want to go deeper there. And as we said, there was also a session on chronic absenteeism in ESSA to go deeper there. Today we're trying to get the overview and trying to stimulate some dialogue and discussion with each other about how we can connect this understanding that chronic absenteeism is this sort of quiet but nefarious force pushing back again all the things schools are trying so hard to do, and how do we address that. And the early warning systems are a good way to build a systematic approach to sort of pay attention and see when kids are signaling that, hey, I need a little bit of help here, I have a little bit of struggles, I'm not quite going in the right way, but if you give me a little bit of help, I can go the right way. How we can bring those ideas together using the supports that are built into ESSA and also to meet some of the requirements of ESSA.
Bob, we haven't had any questions come in yet.
Okay. So I will try to think of some questions to ask myself as we're waiting for some questions. Well, I want to talk about chronic absenteeism a little bit more, and about the point that to recognize that it may seem like a fairly straightforward thing for states to do, but that they do have to address those things of they're going to have a common definition of what chronic absenteeism is, and that's going to probably lead to the need to have a definition of what a day of schooling is. Those are all manageable and doable, but it is something that people may want to be thinking about ahead of time so they're not caught with a short window to sort of gain consensus on a thing, because often standard customary practice is that for even schools within districts have different definitions of what a school day is and how they keep attendance. And as I said, there hasn't really been any standardization yet, except in a few states. There's a few pioneering states like Connecticut and some others that have started to sort of have common definitions. But by and large, that's not the norm. So there is going to be some upfront work there to get the sort of groundwork necessary for chronic absenteeism to serve as a, if so chosen, a fifth indicator. Great. So we have a question. Should chronic absenteeism calculations include students who were enrolled for only part of the academic year? And that's really where this idea of measuring chronic absenteeism as a percentage of school days that it's possible to attend is maybe a way to work around that, right? So it would be that if you're using the 15-day thing, you have to miss 15 days, and students are only enrolled for 2 months, then likely they would not be found chronically absent. But if in those 2 months they missed 7, 8 days of school, that would, that's not a good thing, and they're probably going to struggle. but if you used a percentage, if they missed 10% of the total days of school they could possibly attend, then that is a way to sort of address that. Ultimately, that's going to be a state call on, are they trying to maximize the ability to measure the chronic absenteeism of all kids, or do they just want to have, you know, a straightforward definition that was going to miss kids that are only there for part of the year. All right, we have another question. When developing an early warning system, how should the indicators be weighted or graded in order to consistently evaluate chronic absenteeism? How should the indicators be weighted or graded? That's an interesting question. I'm going to take two tacks on it. There are folks that really want to sort of build like almost a risk index, where they want to sort of weight the different the different off-track indicators, if you will, the things that can say a student's in trouble, and try to quantify which ones are, are sort of more risky or have the greatest impact, and which have a more modest impact, and then use that to end up, rank kids by their level of risk. And, that can have some types of utility. It may tell you who your kids are in most need that you should, make sure that they're getting addressed. On the other hand, it actually doesn't give you a lot of actionable information on the ground, because the people on the ground will still have to unpack and say, well, why did they get that high risk number? Was it because they're not coming to school, or because they're getting in trouble, or because they're not passing their classes? And that's sort of the power of when you keep it at that ABC level, attendance, behavior, course performance, that each of those things are directly addressable. And if you see that as the reason the kid is struggling, you sort of know where to go, or at least start with your intervention. To the extent if you're not indexing, then you're not really going to have to worry about the weighting. Would be one way to think about it. If you are weighting and indexing, it's almost an empirical question where you're running your own data and seeing which of the indicators is it the kids get most in trouble on, and those would then get more weight.
Thanks, Bob. We've had some more questions come in. Delia Hagan wants to know, what do you think is one of the biggest obstacles for states and schools in applying these strategies and the implications of ESSA in their work?
Well, I'm gonna subdivide them into chronic absenteeism and early warning systems. As I was saying, I think one of the biggest challenges is just going to be a common consensus on what is the measure. What does being chronically absent mean? How many days of schooling, or what percent of school? And everyone's going to agree to use that same measure. And then secondly, what is a day of schooling? Because that's just going to run against a lot of common practice where people sort of are used to using their own definitions. And for this to work, it does have to be a common measure. That's in fact the requirement of being a fifth indicator. For early warning systems, these are combining both sort of technical systems and human systems, right? I mean, on one hand, it is getting actionable data into teachers' hands that's just about their kids, because that's all they have the bandwidth for, and why should they have not only focus on their kids and, receive data on kids they don't interact with, right? So there's sometimes a little bit of technical challenge of how you can get that data to their fingertips in an easy way, so they're not digging through lots of screens. But folks are, continually getting solutions for that. The bigger struggle is on the human side. This is changing behaviors, creating new behavior systems, creating time and space for teachers to collaborate and pool their information together, especially if a high school has been departmentalized, or even a middle school, where everyone is used to just being organized in departments, to create space for teachers that share so they can talk, the social studies, science, and English and math teacher can all talk about the same kid, requires some organizational thought and effort. Again, many folks have found ways to solve this, and I encourage you to look at the deeper and longer sessions during this convening to get some of those details. But it really is, I would say, the bigger challenge on the early warning side is building those human systems, and, again, looking for ways in ESSA, again, maybe some of those Title II dollars, with a connection with chronic absenteeism and some of the other outcomes, are ways to get support, to provide the training and facilitation needed to build those human systems, because that's the real power of early warning systems. The teachers know their kids. When they can pool their insights, they get a full picture. Teachers respond to students respond to strong relationships with their teachers if their teachers are empowered with some deeper knowledge about the kids' needs. So it's really creating a human system that allows teachers to share that knowledge and create a full picture and then divide up the labor. So it's not a teacher by themselves trying to do the best they can with their 150 kids, teach them, grade them, and then also give, intervention supports to 20 or 30, right? It's a pretty daunting task. So you have to create teams of teachers and adults in the building. And when it's a high-need situation, recruit outside community members to add additional people power so we can really get that human touch. As I often say, it's often big data meets the human touch, right, equals like good progress and improvement. So I think the challenge is on the human side for the early warning systems is in terms of how to operationalize this at a state or district level.
Bernadette Hendrickson would like to know, what are some examples of ineffective and exclusionary school discipline we could be on the lookout for?
Sure. So, this is a tough one. We know from the data that it's clear that there's often, we apply suspensions and expulsions are not always in an unbiased way. There's often a fair amount of bias in who gets suspended and expelled for similar offenses. And we have to really be on guard to have that not be the case. We also know just the common sense that, if kids are out of school, right, they're not actually making progress. One can make arguments there are times when that's necessary for that to happen for the other kids in the school, but you really can't make an argument it's good for the kids themselves being suspended or excluded. And as I said, oftentimes we want to tell ourselves it's like timeout, but when you talk to the kids, they feel much more like they're being shunned, that like, no one cares, no one wants me. So it is really a goal, and to where possible, to limit that to where it's absolutely necessary, and as much as possible have alternatives, everything from restorative practices to positive behavior intervention systems. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is a real challenge on the ground to find what I often say is the equivalent of like the yellow flag in soccer, right? The thing you get right before you get the thing that kicks you out of the game that sort of tells you stop or else. We still need to work to find that, things that will just send a clear signal to kids that behavior is not appropriate and they have to stop it for everybody's good and their own good. But just simply suspending or expelling kids is not the yellow flag. It's going to the red flag. And if you overuse that, it loses a lot of its power. And the data is pretty clear that high suspension schools aren't necessarily any evidence of being safer schools or better or more effective schools. So we just have to dig deep to find alternative ways to both create safe and supportive environments for all kids that let kids be there every day so they can learn.
John Godinez would like to know, with a school with high turnover rates, how can the school best calculate and monitor the chronic absenteeism rate?
Yep. So that again is the real power of measuring chronic absenteeism in real time at the school level. And schools take attendance every day, so at some level it is not asking them to do more. It's just asking them to analyze the data in a different way, right? When you think about it, almost every school every quarter sends home on a kid's report card how many days they've missed that quarter, right? That is in a way, that is pretty much in itself a chronic absenteeism rate. What they seldom do is then aggregate that up to the school level and say how many of our kids in the past quarter missed enough school to be chronically absent, and what are the patterns, what are the trends, what does that data tell us about where we can have the most powerful interventions. So even if you have a high transience, just measuring it on a month-to-month basis gives you a signal on which kids you need to be paying more attention to as far as having strategies to encourage them to come to school every day. Now, the other argument I would make is that a school with high transient is a school that needs very strong preventive upfront strategies, because you're right, by the time you get to know who the kid is and why they're missing chronic absence, they may be gone and some other kid may be taking their place, and you're sort of you might always be chasing the fine details of the root cause and not have enough time to intervene. So in a highly mobile school where those mobile students are chronically absent, it's a place that needs strong preventive strategies. And that's everything from just having a positive, welcoming environment that makes kids feel wanted and welcome and an adult greets them every morning, to this idea of using success mentors, in which there's a deeper plenary session tomorrow I'd invite people to which is this powerful idea that was started in New York City and is now being tried by 30 communities across the nation, and supported by our National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center, which is to get school staff, cafeteria workers, security guards, office workers, teachers, and community partners, and each of them 1, 2, 3 chronically absent kids, and sort of, become their mentor, and really every week, like every day, like just welcome them to school, ask them how they're doing, ask them if they've got their work done, ask them if they have any issues, call them when they're, text them when they're not there, saying how can we get you here by 10, have some, fun programming every 2 weeks to sort of celebrate their progress or just the being in school in general, have effective disciplinary policies, and just do really close data tracking. Those sort of strong preventative strategies are what's needed in a highly mobile school.
Thank you. Brian Blank asked, how do you determine and properly intervene the difference in types of behavior for absenteeism, such as being defiant versus a valid reason for absences? This can definitely impact school board policies. What are your recommendations for high schools dealing with defiant behavior around absenteeism?
Yeah, so 2 parts to that answer. One part is you do have to build enough of a relationship. Someone has to have a relationship with those students to try to understand the root cause behind that absenteeism. And sometimes the defiant reason and behavior is a defiant reason, that the kids are feeling like there's no point, that whether they're in school or not, they're going to have the same outcome. That's actually trying to convince them that being in school is going to change their life pattern, and that's where you have to work to show them. On the other hand, that fronted defiant behavior may be hiding a deeper root cause that actually is in a very different direction. So I'll give you a prime example from some of our work. We were in a large high school in New York City, very veteran faculty. Most have been there 20, 30 years. Thought they had a deep understanding of their kids and didn't really need any of this new ideas of early warning systems or dealing with chronic absenteeism. But ultimately, they came to see its value, and one teacher told a story of why, which was that she said she had a student who routinely, she taught math, first period was his class, and routinely she would see him in school in the day and not in her class. And she was very offended by that. He thought he was being disrespectful and cutting her class. And she said, frankly, I couldn't wait to fail him for all those missed days. In which case, the science teacher who knew the kid and had a deeper relation said, hold on, let me tell you the real story. First period, he's taking his dad to chemotherapy, and he's afraid to tell anybody because if he thinks if he tells people, they won't let him do it. So sometimes defiance is defiance, sometimes defiance is covering something else, and that's why we really have to build relationships and to get a deeper understanding of why. And I'll give you another example we had about how you can actually turn around what seemingly is defiant behavior. There was a student who had a reputation for being very defiant, actually as part of an attendance campaign, improved his attendance, and was going to be given an award. And there was a great nervousness that he would be disruptive or mocking or, something sarcastic in getting this award. And when he came and got the award, he actually started crying. And he said because he'd never been recognized for anything in his life. So not to sugarcoat it, sometimes there are kids that are just being, that got to their place where they've decided that defiance is their best course of action for whatever reasons, and it can be very troubling to schools. But the key to any of that is still having a relationship and figuring out root causes and figuring out ways to change that defiant behavior into something else.
Patricia Graysick would like to know, are there EWS tools currently available for elementary schools? She's only aware of EWS tools for middle and high schools.
Yeah, well, the good news there is that more and more people are starting to experiment with early warning systems at the elementary level. Some of our team I know has worked in Tulsa at the elementary level for that very reason. We've seen it work in the middle and upper schools, and we wanted to bring it down to the elementary level. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. You know, some things are the same, some things are different. I mean, chronic absenteeism is certainly an issue in pre-KK and elementary schools. Sometimes it's as much a parent challenge as a kid challenge, so sometimes your solutions are different. But basic understanding the patterns and who it is and then getting to know them and sort of working on solutions is the same. Sometimes, you know, people have substituted like being able to read by 3rd grade as opposed to course grades as sort of their indicator of academic on-trackness. Behavior issues are paramount at elementary grades also in finding ways to sort of address both mild misbehavior and more stronger things in positive ways. So there's nothing to prevent, in a broad sense, elementary schools taking it on. This just started out really tied to high school dropout, which obviously there's roots in elementary school, but that's why it got rooted more in middle and high school. But I would say there's a growing trend towards elementary schools, and more you'll be able to find stuff on it. And if you go to the attendance work, if you look at their toolkit for elementary chronic absenteeism, they have a toolkit that I think you can build from that to a larger early warning system as a good starting place.
Christy Prady-Diaz asks, how does EWS fit into the elements of the NTFS system? And do you have strategies on changing the mindset of staff regarding chronic absenteeism, the effect it has on the student, and getting them to use the new EWS as they are already overloaded with their daily duties?
Yep. So, you know, one of the things we found that's really important when you start talking to schools, faculties, teachers, principals about chronic absenteeism is just one, to help them understand that you can have decent average daily attendance and still have lots of chronically absent kids. And that is still almost always a surprise to folks, because what I talked about, we're hardwired to think if our average daily attendance is in the 90s, we must be okay. So partly it's just showing them, and once they've seen it, they recognize that, yeah, there's actually an issue. We should do something about it. And the second one is what I was making the point is that this is actionable. There's evidence and things we can do to help kids come more often. So it's not sort of a fruitless task or just one more burden. Early warning systems are really interesting because, yes, any new thing is new work to overburden people, and I fully see that every time we work in schools, that folks in schools are working really hard, and almost all of them are working hard in overtime already. But the power of it is that there's a little upfront cost, but once you do it, it actually helps reduce effort in lots of other places, right? We spend a lot of effort on discipline. We spend a lot of effort on remediation. We spend a lot of effort on getting kids to be engaged in class. And sometimes that effort's not very successful because we're not quite looking at the right signals and we're not quite using the right strategies for what's causing that behavior. An early warning system really helps us focus on those fundamentals of coming every day, being able to focus in class, get your work done, the building blocks of school success. And by organizing around that, when kids come more often, teachers can keep their pace up better in classrooms. They don't have to always say in a no-win position, let me remind you what we did yesterday, and then you sort of lose the kids who were there and they start acting up, and then you got to take time to address that. Or you weren't here, ask a friend, I have to move on, in which case those kids get frustrated, start acting up, you have to pause and do things right. So the power of that early warning thing is that little bit of more upfront work often leads to a lot of effort saving that was not very productive in other ways. And that's why many schools, once they start doing this, often say, like, I just can't believe this was just never part of school as it was, just the normal fabric of school.
Patricia Graysick asks, should chronic absenteeism be calculated by days in school or percentage of time in class? There are students who are in their school building, i.e. school counselor's office, but not in their classrooms where they belong.
Very good point, right? And that, I think, so I would say that probably at a state system-wide level, you're going to have to still focus on the days. But I think it's very important at the school level for them to track that. Because you're right, that our kids could be skipping, they could be in the hallways. That daily classroom attendance matters, and that's really what needs to be to make them be in school. So I would probably say a split system where on one level for accountability and other metrics we focus on days of schooling, but at the school level, as far as to help it really make a difference for teaching and learning, I would add on, in cases where it's an issue, I think it would be fine to track like periods of it, of learning also.
Thank you. Megan Thornton says, I am a school counselor and I am finding more and more that students are needing my office to work through the effects of various traumatic experiences in their life. Although our school strives to make relationships and be very preventative with mentoring, morning meetings, PBIS, CICO, after-school programs, what ideas do you have on how to get parents to buy in on the importance of attendance?
Yeah, so one of the areas that folks have done some good work, and it'll be covered, I think, a little more detail in the chronic absenteeism plenary to follow, is that a number of researchers have started testing the right way to have the right communication with home to get them to understand the importance of kids being there every day. And they ultimately found out the simplest thing of just giving them real-time monthly tracking of saying that, you know, we really like your student to be in school every day. We're excited when he is or she is. You know, it's really important for success to be here every day. And in the past month or 2 months, your kid has missed this many days. This puts them on track to be chronically absent. Even just that simple messaging in sort of a neutral way has been shown to increase attendance by a couple of percentage points. Because, again, they found that many parents underestimate by half how many days their kids actually miss. They've tried with things like that people have done with energy bills, or like comparing with your neighbor or similar kids. They haven't yet to find that out making that much of a difference for parents, as opposed to just the straight factual information that schooling is important, here's how much your days of kids have missed. Other people have worked with like texting to give them, and here they found some pretty good impacts of like, you know, your student was absent, here are the assignments they missed. You know, they need to get them done by Friday or else their grade's going to go down. Again, like we think we communicate that. We communicate that to students, but we often don't communicate that in real time to parents. And they found that that real-time communication to parents on just what the facts are and some of the immediate consequences, again, in a neutral, supportive way, not like, you know, you're in trouble, your kid's in trouble or else, but just like these are the facts, and that can be an effective way to get parents to be more focused on what it takes to get their kids to school every day.
John Godinez would like to know, what are some EWS tools for a secondary school that is implementing PBIS?
Yep. So, and this is one of the things that you know, it's just important for folks to see the connected dots, right? Because some schools have PBIS, some schools have RTI, some schools have student support teams, and EWS shouldn't be like a fourth meeting, right? That's not the idea, right? It should be take your existing meeting and just grow it a little. So PBIS, at least initially, they've changed. They now didn't focus on chronic absenteeism, right? But that's an obvious like connection thing to track along with the other things that are tracked in PBIS systems, right? And then you would say an obvious consequence of either struggling with behavior and attendance is poor grades. And if you just make those two connections, pretty soon you're tracking all of the sort of core early warning indicators. And then from there, you can just extend out your systems. In PBIS, we're doing some good preventive work. We're doing some good targeted work. How do we just take those same strategies, many cases like the same artifacts, and just change some of the wording, right, and also focus on attendance and also focus on, like, getting assignments done and getting grades in. So I really encourage people that are strong PBIS implementers and believe a lot in it not to see early warning as another thing, but rather something that could just be an outgrowth of what they're already doing and building upon a lot of the good work they've already done.
Thank you. Dave Watsula would like to know, how do you balance the need for states and districts to have flexibility to set their own definition of chronic absence with the benefit of having consistent and comparable data across states and districts? It seems like the measure might lose some value if there are different definitions floating around.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying is people just have to come to understand that, like, we all like being able to measure things our own way, and there's value in that in some ways, but for something like chronic absenteeism where, like, it's just, and again, like, this is going to be hard on human terms, but it is, like, on a technical terms, is what's true is that, like, it doesn't matter so much if your definition is 10%, 11%, 9%, 15 days, 17 days, 18 days. What matters is you have a measure of missing a significant amount of school. You apply it uniformly, you track it, and you respond to it, right? You measure, you monitor, you act. That is going to get you so much more positive outcomes than trying to reach perfect consensus or perfect insight onto, like, what is the absolute best definition of chronic absenteeism, right? The best definition of chronic absenteeism is something all folks can agree to implement. It's a measure of missing a significant amount of school. You know, something on the order of multiple weeks, or, you know, 10% plus or minus some is where you want to end up. And I think to have power and be able to learn from each other, because again, people come up with great insights that are never shared or spread because there's no common reference point, is that it is important to try to reach that common measure for that reason, even if you have to give up a little bit of local individuality. In my opinion, people could argue it differently.
Thank you, Bob. We don't have any more questions.
Well, that was a rich dialogue. Thank folks for joining in. And as I would say, there are many other sessions in our national convening for those that want to dig deeper. There's one specifically on chronic absenteeism and ESSA. There is one on early warning systems, a school improvement tool. There's a success mentor plenary tomorrow. There's a chronic absenteeism plenary coming up. And there was a strong early warning system one just done that you could look at archives. So there's lots of places to have this be the starter discussion and go find more and dig deeper into these, how we can use, leverage ESSA and meet the needs of ESSA through addressing chronic absenteeism and implementing early warning systems.
So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We hope you found it helpful and informative. We would like to invite you to attend upcoming events that we will be having and stay connected with the center. On the screen, you will see our upcoming webinars and an address if you have questions or comments. We will send a link to the recorded webinar in the coming weeks. Before you leave, please make sure you complete the poll questions that will be on the screen shortly.